Well, I got my new computer yesterday, so I shouldn't sound like I'm
No
underwater.
more popping noise.
Yeah, so far so good.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's jump into it. We're going to talk about the immaculate grid tonight. Again, this is really going to be our most survey centric, BLM GLO manual type discussion that we have. In fact, he's got copies out of, an original map and printed some of the original field notes there. So we'll read through that. But again, the book is balancing its purpose to talk about the expansion of, the United States West. We've got the Louisiana Purchase has happened, and now we've got Jared Mansfield, who is our Survey General that's overseeing it. And it starts the chapter out with just some interesting anecdotes about him. It talks about the moment he left Yale in 1777, his life as a teacher, soldier, and instructor at West Point was one of such blameless rectitude, it is almost a relief to discover that he was expelled from Yale for discreditable escapades. Yet even here, his crime, cheating on an exam, might be seen as an attempt to achieve perfection. Certainly, the undeviating straightness of the rest of his career must have served as some form of compensation for the one stain on his character. So as we talked about Putnam before and the type of surveys that he and his teams were doing, right? There was errors, there was jogs in the lines, there weren't straight lines, and then reading through this chapter, learning about Mansfield, everything was as good and clean as it can be. There's certainly errors in there. They note a couple of those, where they don't line up with different basin meridians, but by and large, he did it right, or made an attempt to do it right, which is pretty impressive. So it notes here that Mansfield was a mathematician of the highest class. His essays, Mathematical and Physical, published in 1802, was the first contribution to that field by a native born American. And then as he gets into it, at the end of the first page there, it talks about the type of equipment that he was ordering for this. So a 3-foot reflecting telescope mounted in the best manner, a 30-inch portable transit instrument answering also the purpose of an equal altitude instrument and theodolite, and an astronomical pendulum clock. The author notes that this was not the action of someone who would tolerate curving straight lines and square ones that looked like diamonds. And so it tells a story here. If you imagine those who have driven through that part of the country, the best way to appreciate what Mansfield did is to drive west from Dayton, Ohio on Interstate 70, just across the Indiana state border, to swing north on State Route 277. And it talks about how you can see all these fields laid out in squares, and you can just see for miles out there. And anyone that spent some time in Indiana, Ohio, Illinois, a lot of the same stuff. It's you hit that section line road, and it runs forever and as straight as can be, and as far as you can see. So I just want to point that out and see if any of you guys have experienced that. Jerry being in the Midwest there, but you guys been able to drive through or notice any of those areas?
There's a great song about it, right? The flyover states.
I was just going to say, I've seen it flying to Michigan, and
Yep.
Michigan's the same thing. When you're in
Yep.
the air on a clear day, just those lines are straight as can be for miles and miles.
Yep. Exactly.
Yeah.
I live at,
Go ahead.
I was going to say I live at the edge of west edge of the Virginia Military District, but I think those lines are boring.
I think it's great. I did learn something too last week. I'd heard it before, but Indiana has less than 600 acres of native timber left. It was almost 100% timber when they started laying the lines out here. They were talking about this in the mock trial.
Holy cow.
Gary Kent, who's very familiar with that area, he was saying that they estimate native timber is less than 600 acres out of the entire state, because they, to the book, what it's saying, right, is they just went through and they settled it, right, and they plowed it and they grazed it out and they cut down all the trees to build everything, and there is very, very little native timber. That's, there's a section of land is really all it is left.
Yeah, that's all that's left. Yeah.
Pretty crazy stuff. Continuing on here, it says exactly 1 mile to the east, Indiana's border with Ohio runs parallel to it, a north-south line that Jared Mansfield designated as the first principal meridian. West of that line, he was to establish a survey whose squares were so immaculate that their pattern would be compared to graph paper, checkerboards, and plaid. In other words, Ohio, with its different and indifferent surveys, was the proving ground for the system, but 277, the highway, marks the first line inside Mansfield's monumental gridiron. Its regularity grew from the initial point formed at the meeting of the principal meridian, a carefully surveyed north-south line, and an east-west baseline crossing it exactly at right angles. The squares were numbered outward from that 0 point. Running east-west, they were called ranges, and north-south, they were townships. Thus, the first square west of a meridian and north of a baseline would be titled Range 1 West, Township 1 North. Mansfield himself personally surveyed the second principal meridian, whose initial point can still be found a few miles south of Paoli, Indiana, and others were run as new areas of land were pried from the Native Americans and put on the market. Finishing off that paragraph, says the most spectacular example was the fifth principal meridian, whose initial point was in Arkansas, near the present town of Blackton, 26 miles west of the Mississippi, but which was extended so far north that it eventually controlled other lands in Arkansas, Missouri, Iowa, South Dakota, North Dakota, and most of Minnesota, ending with township 164 north on the Canadian border. One of the things he also did is he provided a solution to the problem of converging meridians. Obviously, the Earth is round. If you're running true north, that north is going to start converging as you hit the North Pole, right? And so they made these correction lines. It says in here, as townships were stacked on top of each other, they grew narrower, and after 4 or 5, the most northerly might be over 60 yards narrower than it was supposed to be. Consequently, Mansfield's successor, Edward Tiffin, decreed that a fresh start should be made at that point with new meridians exactly 6 miles apart marked off on the baseline. The jaw created these correction lines where the old north-south lines abruptly stopped and new one began 50 or 60 yards further east or west, became a feature of the grid, and because back roads tend to follow surveyors' lines, they present an interesting driving hazard today. So those that have driven through, obviously we just talked about looking at those straight lines, but how many of you guys have seen those correction lines? So on Trent's got our principal meridian map up on the screen here.
Yeah, I just pulled it up because we talked about, Arkansas and the fifth principle. And so I was just kind of, going back to look at some of this. Obviously it was, I'm assuming the red dot is actually point of beginning. Yeah. So that's and I know it's in some water areas now, right? Like we can't get within a quarter mile of it or something now, but yeah. And then so there's the fifth principal meridian clear down in Arkansas down here in 1815.
Interestingly, if you look at the fifth principal meridian, it goes to Illinois, skips Illinois, goes across the nose of Iowa, and then skips Wisconsin. Now you notice that the fourth principal meridian that we're on, there's actually 2 baselines for that. There's one in central Illinois, and then there's one that forms the southern baseline of Wisconsin. We're actually in Wisconsin on the fourth principal meridian extended. So that went up to Iowa, skipped the nose of Iowa, and then continued north until it intersected Wisconsin.
Funny.
Why they did that, I don't know. Now maybe we'll figure that out.
That's pretty neat.
Yep. That's always a great map to pull up all the time.
Good. All right. I'm Jed here, so probably tomorrow if you have time. Yeah. All right. Thanks.
Well, if you pull that up, TK, again, look at how many Alaska has.
Oh yeah, let's go share it again one more time. Share. Where'd it go? Hold on. I messed up. Oh. There we go. Yeah. That's insane.
Obviously, they're not extending those out because of terrain and access to that and just population centers. But it's interesting to note that in 1815, while you don't have the frozen tundra that restricts you as much, but look how much further they've extended that out versus in a more modern society. Look at 1956 as the most recent two, right? But they're not trying to get one across all of that state.
I couldn't imagine Copper River in 1905.
When we had some of the Alaskan cadastral surveyors come down with their Doppler receivers and inertial surveyors for some research projects we were working on in Madison, they said that the meridians in the principal meridians in Alaska formed an interesting acronym. If somebody wants to sit down and figure that out.
Oh, interesting.
I see it.
You see it?
I was going to say, yeah. I'm assuming FUCKS.
Yeah, I don't know if that was intentional or not, but that's what they said it was cold up there.
Yeah.
Cold as ...
Yeah. No, that's great. So we've got the correction lines we were just talking about. So if you're ever in a lot of the Midwest areas or areas that have really strong section line roads, you'll be heading north on one and all of a sudden hit a T intersection and take a little 60-yard jog in there instead of head back up. And then on the bottom of page 162, it does talk about, despite the improvements, Manfield surveyors were not immune from error. Massive jogs occurred in eastern Illinois, where the parallels running out of the second principal meridian spectacularly failed to meet up with those of the third principal meridian. And a shatter zone of steeply angled lines had to be introduced to join one lot to another. But such was not the action of someone who would not tolerate, make sure I'm reading this in the order. Such mistakes were inevitable given the pressure the surveyors were under to make the land available for sale as quickly as possible. And then we kind of get into just some pricing and some stuff that's going through with the settlers. As early as 1798, the federal government in Philadelphia had sent Rufus Putnam an anxious request for information about a group of 300 Kentucky families who had settled in unsurveyed country just beyond the treaty line. And when he went to investigate, he found that many had come intending to buy the lands as they should be offered for sale by the United States, but that rising prices had pushed them on. So as cheap as this land was, they're pushing themselves even outside the survey area. They're squatting and just taking over some of this land. So this race developed between surveyors and squatters marked the entire history of the land survey, and it was rare for a survey team to measure productive country that had no settlers at all.
I thought that was interesting because I picture these guys just out in the middle of absolute nowhere, nobody around, and it makes sense that the productive land, somebody's already there.
Yeah. So I had a close friend. He asked me this. We were just kind of we would go backpacking together. He asked me this question. So we get into this, what they're selling and what productive land is. They get into on page 164. First they were selling it by the whole section at $2 an acre. Then they start going by the half section, and then the quarter section, and then the quarter section, right? And that's where the back 40 term comes from. That's in popular society. But he asked me this question. It was really kind of an interesting thought process. Imagine being one of these settlers out there, right? And just farming it and what you need to survive and grow. You get to take your cattle, you plant your wheat, and it takes a couple years to even get much out of there. And obviously you're hunting and fishing to survive, right? But he threw out this question. It was kind of an interesting one. Imagine you're out there, and how long would it take you to grow enough product, wheat, corn, cattle, vegetables, in order to be able to have your own pizza completely from your own product? Not going to some country corner store, in town, but how long would it take you to be able to grow enough to actually make a pizza completely yourself?
Depends on the
Most of
number of
civilization would
toppings.
starve
Yeah.
because they're not 10 minutes from a Dollar General. They would
Yeah.
die.
I was going to say that's one of the best lines from Yellowstone is living with the land and not on the land, right? And
Yep.
so it goes back to that analogy of, yeah, I couldn't even imagine to try to piece that together, from the milk to make the cheese to, any of that, right? How,
You got to get the wheat to feed the cows to
Yeah.
then get the milk. Plus, you're
Yeah.
drinking it just to survive in between.
yeah,
It was a really interesting thought process as we were
Yeah.
walking down the trail.
yeah, those kind of conversations on the trail. I've had many
Yes,
of those, but
that's
those
the
are
only
fun.
place it can happen.
It is. That is true because you're hiking for hours and hours. Or like the one that I do, it's 10 and a half hours for us. And it's like, yeah, you got to have certain things to talk about.
Yeah.
The things that make you go,
Yeah.
I'm using that one next time.
Yeah. Do it. Let me know what answer you come up with after you solve it.
Well, and the best part is my hiking partner is a civil engineer, so that will even
I'll get him going too. That's great. So on this next page here, we've got Jared Mansfield's plot of the second Prince Meridian in 1836. So this is very much indicative of the type of maps we've all seen and shared, the old GLO maps where they've laid these out. And we'll get into a second how they laid them out, but they try and get some major features, identify the land, and lay out those sections within it.
Hey, Trent. Hey, about that section there. Does anyone have or know of any book about Abraham Lincoln? I've heard that he surveyed in Illinois, some parts of Illinois during that time. Anybody knows of a book about the surveying career of Abraham Lincoln?
So so across from Ford Theater in DC, there is the gift shop for the Ford Theater, and in there is a statue, is the better way to say it, I guess, of every book that's ever been written about Abraham Lincoln. Have you been there, Aaron, yet, Leach? You have to go. You have to go when we're back next month. It is. I'll see while we're chit chatting. I have pictures of it, but I gotta find the thing on it. But there's. I may be wrong. 50,000 books, 18,000 books, or it's like an astronomical number of books written on Abraham Lincoln, and they have them in the lobby of this Ford Theater. So, to say, does somebody have a book about Abraham Lincoln's survey career? Yeah, 100%. So who just threw that in the chat? I missed that.
That's Google's AI there.
Oh, there you go. Okay.
There, so
I gotta find you the picture because I took it from the top down. It's actually the old house across the street from where Lincoln passed away, and they've turned it kind of into the gift shop and all those kind of things. And so you walk upstairs and you see the bedroom, and then you walk back kind of back downstairs through this gift center. So it's insane. But I'll find the picture while we keep talking.
I've tried to find that book, Abraham Lincoln with Compass and Chain, and haven't had any luck in the last few years. But
I think I have that. I think I have
Oh, do
that
you?
at my office. Yeah,
Oh,
it was
awesome.
a silent auction item that I have a couple of years ago, and I do have that book.
Awesome. Yeah, I've been looking and on historical little indie bookshops online and no luck so far, but very cool.
Okay, yeah, I'll verify it tomorrow when I get to the office, but I'm almost positive. Yep, that's the one I got.
Of course you do.
Because it comes from a scholarship auction.
It's yeah. I'm gonna get sidetracked. Let's jump back in here.
Sorry. Yeah.
I start writing these down and saving them. I'll Google them and saving them. So when we're done, I can
Yeah.
put them in my to search list. So anyone have any interesting stories or things talked about when we look at GLO maps like this? Anything you guys have experienced? We'll jump over to the next page if not. Okay. So it says on here that this system gave every parcel of virgin land ground a unique identity, beginning with the township. Its name might be Township 2 North, Range 4 West, Second Principal Meridian. With the township, the 36 sections were numbered in an idiosyncratic fashion established by the 1796 Act, beginning with Section 1 in the northeast corner and continuing first westward, then eastward, back and forth in a bostrophodenic fashion. That is like an ox pulling a plow until Section 36 was reached in the southeast corner. So obviously, being a surveyor, I know that's the way it's laid out. I've never been told really why. Obviously, here's a new vocabulary word for us, bostrophodenic. But I didn't think about it like an ox pulling a plow. That totally makes sense, right? I kind of get how now perhaps that was laid out and why it was done that way.
That's a wonderful surveying trivia question. It's bostrophodonic. Yeah.
There we go. I knew Jerry would know that one.
Yeah, I love that. Yep.
So each square mile consequently had its own identity. As the size of the minimum parcel of land shrank, its identity would simply grew more specific. So that's where we get our aliquot part calls, right? In 1832, the smallest area for which a farmer could bid at a government land auction was reduced to a quarter of a quarter, or 40 acres. And it was said here, jumping down a couple more sentences, after the Civil War, freed slaves were reckoned to be self-sufficient with, quote, 40 acres and a mule. And in the 20th century, real estate developers preferred to deal in 40-acre parcels. Even rotary sprinklers were designed to irrigate 40 acres of grass. And long before the U.S. Postal Service ever dreamed of zip codes, every one of these quarter sections had a specific name, such as quarter southwest, quarter northwest, section 8, township 22 north, range 4 west, 5th principal meridian. So this is not how I'm used to seeing them called out. Normally it's the southwest quarter, the southwest quarter, the southeast to the southwest quarter, something like that. But where your guys are at, RPLSS states, have you ever seen them called out kind of in this quarter southwest fashion? Definitely a new one there, I guess. And then we get to the crux of it. Obviously, we can go survey all this. We survey it out today. But what is the bigger title and what one of the challenges that we have as surveyors is we deal in the where, right? Where is that deed fall on the ground? Where is this section? Where is this quarter section or 40 acres? But the challenges of the time, because you had squatters, you had people getting ahead of the survey, you had fraudulent land offices, and all sorts of things happen. What the system depended upon was a clear title to the property. Reading that second to last paragraph there on page 166. This was indeed the very purpose of the grid. As a result, there was always a strand of opinion that regarded squatters as a menace. In 1807, a draconian act authorized their punishment with fines and imprisonment, but it was rarely enforced, and after years of turning a blind eye to the practice, the Preemption Act of 1841 gave squatters the legal right to do what up to then had been a custom backed by local squatter power. Buy the land they had improved by plowing or building a cabin at the going rate of $1.25 per acre. But long before then, most squatters had recognized the power of a surveyor's plat. So because the way this was laid out, because it was intended to have clear title from property to property line, one of the things we always have to remember from a retracement standpoint is gaps don't exist, right? These were sold off in aliquot parts. And so in theory, if you go back far enough, you're going to realize that it all had either a common grantor with the US government or common granting lines at quarter section lines. And that's often an argument that happens back and forth when we go into surveying teaching is well, there's a gap here. And by this principle, gaps are pretty much impossible to have happen because those lines were laid out and then sold as those aliquot parts to a section line or to a aliquot section line. Okay, now we're going to talk a little bit about how they laid out these townships, jumping over to 167. First, the township or exterior lines were to be established. From the initial point, the surveyors were instructed to move westward along the baseline, parallel across the entire district, marking with posts at every half mile and mile for the quarter section and section lines, as well as with 6 mile markers for the township corners. From each of the 6 mile markers, a meridian was then run north, marked in the same way. Finally, the team returned to the initial point and worked its way north along the principal meridian at each 6 mile point. And east to west parallel was run and cut across the north-south lines. Branded onto every corner mark was the number of the section, the township, and range. Along the way, surveyors had to make a map on a scale of 4 inches to the mile and keep notes in their field books, recording the distance covered and the principal natural features found. And in case they did not know, the manual offered this example of how to record a meridian running north from a baseline. And so many of us are familiar with looking at these old notebooks, but north along the east boundary of section 36, township 21 north of the baseline and range 6 of the 4th Prince Meridian. And then on the left-hand side, how many chains you move. So 14.7 to a brook, 25 links wide with a rapid current, runs southwesterly about 10 chains and then turns to the northwest. Continuing on, then 27.6 chains, left the creek bottom and entered hills, 29.4 chains, a white oak, 15 inches in diameter, 33.7 chains, a hickory, 24 inches in diameter, and then 40 chains. Set a quarter section corner post on the top of a ridge bearing north, easterly and southwesterly, from which a post, a white oak, bears south 28 degrees west, 197 links. And so if you ever have to go back and retrace section lines, obviously these old field books were handwritten, and if you're not reading them all the time, they get difficult to read. But yeah, that's the way they were taking notes as they cut across. Or as Jerry pointed out to begin with, they were doing it in a tablet and then rewriting those notes into a notebook, right?
So back on that previous page, I thought it fascinating, the branding onto each corner mark, the number of the section, township, and range. I mean, that in itself right there is an art and science. It'd take me all day just to do that.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I've seen some of them. I've seen some of them, on trees that are still living.
Yep.
And it's amazing that they could do that, do it legibly.
So these definitely weren't just two-man crews running and doing this. This
Yeah.
was an outfit too, right? To make
There's
this
probably
happen.
one Scribner who did just that.
Yeah.
While
And
you're
if
at a break, I was gonna say while you're at a breaking point, I'll pull up my here's the picture of the Ford Theater gift shop. So it's I took a picture of the plaque. It's 15,000 books have been written on Lincoln.
wow, that's
And so
cool.
this is what it looks like, and then there's the plaque that I took. And then look back up. That's from the ground up. And it's one of every book ever written. One of 15,000 books ever written on that thing. It's insane. So it's a cool spot to go see if you're ever back in DC.
Add that to the list there, right?
That's right. That's right. Hmm.
So those of us that surveyed in the PLSS system, any stories or comments on field books and field notes from the original surveyors?
I was gonna say, I mean, if Parrish would happen to be jumping on here, the amount of topo calls he's used throughout his career to be able to, hone in on a search of an original corner, um, was probably, I would say probably, daily or weekly, right? For somebody
Yeah,
who was like an original BLM survey from the 60s, 70s. Those topo calls were just as gold as anything else. So, um, you start backing things in from there. So today's
yeah,
world, we don't necessarily have to deal with that, but I mean, we certainly can, right? I mean, obviously going back to ledges of, some kind of distance, or even this to the left creek bottom, right? Like, um, that's a topo call we'd still use today to be able to back something in. So, yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, our calls to natural monuments should
Yep.
be top of our rules of construction that we
Yep.
often don't use.
Yep.
In the West here, particularly, we've kind of talked about that for sure. But the other thing with this is this may not apply anymore too, which is one of the challenges. Is that creek has meandered,
Yeah.
right? Or that 15-inch white oak is now a 36-inch white oak, right? And or even how
Yeah.
many of our surveyors today can identify a white oak versus a hickory, and be able to
Right.
even as they're walking through. So there's quite a bit in there for sure. So jumping over to the next page, we won't read through all these field notes here, but he says that represented one side of a quarter-mile section, and the same procedure had to be repeated for all 36 square miles of the township. Then, beginning at the southeast corner of each township, they worked west and north, filling in section lines. Shrewd speculators learned to avoid land in the northwest corner of a township because any errors measured showed up there, and that was where most arguments over boundaries occurred. So to kind of illustrate what we're talking about, do you mind jumping over to that township map that we had up earlier?
The Principal Meridian one, or
Yeah, the Principal Meridian
oh,
one.
yeah.
You can see
Yeah,
those
yeah.
sections there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Page 165. No, the 160. Sorry, in our book, the 165.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Yeah.
Yep. It's up. Okay. And it's up.
Yeah. So they've laid out all these townships and now they're coming back in here. So this one, it looks like it cuts out at section 35 in the very, very bottom right corner. But if that were section 36, they would run along the south side of 36 to the corner common to 35 and 36. They would run north up that line, and they would go out then to the northeast of 36 and then run a correction line back to the northwest of 36, right? And they would leapfrog that all the way up each line. They would come back down and redo that and running correction lines for those east-west ones and then running north. So what happens is, one, you're going to have inconsistencies in measurements just running across that land, errors and chaining and whatever it might be. And then because they've run that exterior square, that may not be perfectly square. Obviously, the book's telling us that Mansfield did a pretty dang good job of that, but it's not going to be perfect. So once we get to that north line of the township, so sections 1 through 6, they're going to do their best job to give adequate parts. They're going to run to the quarter section, the half mile, right? And then the quarter section, the quarter mile there, and then lot it out on that north one. And so that could have deficiencies if that last quarter mile falls short, or if it runs long, it could have extras. And same thing on that west side. And you can see it on this page as you're looking at that in the very bottom left, section 31 there, right? We can see the first 2 lines there, kind of along the east line of it. You can see the acres called out, and then you can kind of see the line in there for the north-south quarter section line. You see the next quarter of 40 acres are called out there. But then along that west line, you see all these numbers. Those are the areas and lots that are left over because there was excess or deficiency in there. So they've tried to keep it equal, and then push all that air to the very west of it. So then section 6, being the very northwest corner, would potentially have lots on the north and the west. And as the book just pointed out, those are the ones that had the most disputes and the most problems, and often ended up being deficient. And so they weren't as valuable from an acreage standpoint.
I was trying to find the random and true map so we could show that, but
yeah,
I keep looking.
I think it doesn't say in here, but I believe Jared Mansfield is the one that also established the concept of the legal area of a section, being 640 acres as a basis for, that it was illegal. It was understood it wasn't necessarily the true area of it because of the errors and that type of stuff, but they were considered legal areas for sale purposes.
I found a map. Hold on one second. Just got to find it in the document. Of course, I found a document that's like 100 and something pages. Where are you at? Let me, I'll just share the screen by itself. I was trying to click on this one. So it shows you the 1, 2, 3, 4, how they laid it out. And then I was kind of getting up in here so we can zoom in on that, but it's not working out so well.
Yeah. Got 95 pages to scroll through to find where that exhibit is.
Exactly. There we go. All right, moving on.
Okay. So it says, continuing on here, when the surveyor's plat was delivered to the district land office, it would show that every square mile of prairie or corner of forest had been given an identity. And it talks about this Robert Pulliam. Where Robert Pulliam's farm stood, it was section 21, township 14 north, range 5 west, the third principal meridian, together with the letters AP, meaning applied for, which show that the land had been preempted. Eventually, the claim had to be paid for, and once that was done, it was entered on the definitive survey map and patented, at which point the prairie or forest became private property whose ownership would be protected by full force of the law. This was something the wildest squatter eventually learned. As a means of defense, a surveyor's plat came to carry more firepower than a Kentucky long rifle packed full of lead shot and black powder. So those original surveyors, protecting those private rights, even the squatters' rights, became very, very powerful. It talks about some of those squatters in those areas that didn't yet have it surveyed. It said that they would find it necessary to take the sun at noon to find north-south and at evening to find east-west as a guide by which to run these claim lines. So many steps each way, 800 double paces by 1600, counted 320 acres, more or less, the legal area of a claim. It may readily be supposed that these lines were far from correct, but they answered all the necessary claim purposes, for it was understood among the settlers that when land came to be surveyed and entered, all inequalities would be put right by adding or subtracting land. So now we've got these surveyors that are trained and laying these. We've got these squatters that are understanding the square PLSS system, and so now they're doing their own. They're going further west than it's been surveyed, and they're doing their own rudimentary breakdown of some section or claim that they have there, knowing that when the surveyors get there, it'll all be figured out in the end, but they've got their square claim that will fit within that somehow. Jumping down to the page, bottom page 169, we've talked about this in previous chapters, but there's this breakdown between what was being done correctly in the north and what was being bastardized in the south. They still didn't get this concept of the square PLSS system. The locals were fighting it. So it talks here that as territory south of Tennessee was squeezed out of the Cherokee, Choctaw, and Chickasaw, Mansfield's system was applied there as well. Two principal meridians were established: the Washington Meridian in southeast Mississippi and the St. Stephen's Meridian in southern Alabama, both taking as their baseline the 31st parallel, the boundary between the United States and Spain's territory. Yet even under Mansfield's rigid rules, northern regularity still battled to overcome southern customs. Squatters measured out their land not by squares, but by metes and bounds, and the surveyors' rectangles had to be fitted around these irregular parcels. When we get to Utah, we have the Mormon pioneers that settled here in the 1850s and 1860s. They've got their own town site systems, and then when we become a state in the 1890s, Utah gets surveyed, and the surveyors for Utah had the same problem. You have all these irregular town sites that just popped up where a town did, right? And when they went to go survey it, they've got to conform those town sites then, these irregular shapes, even though they were square lot and blocks, these irregular town site shapes had to then be forced into those surveyor maps. Jumping on to 178, it says, in the first 2 decades of the 19th century, cotton prices doubled and plantation owners in Virginia and the Carolinas began to sell their exhausted land and move to Alabama and Mississippi, accompanied by their slaves, livestock, furniture, and machinery. It was not like a pioneer family moving west. This was an undertaking on the scale of relocating a factory today. It was often financed by investors in New York and Philadelphia. Every care had to be taken to acquire the best site, and the soil most suited to cotton growing was the rich valley land around Natchez and along the lowlands of the Mississippi River. Most of this was owned by the Cherokee, although some was squatted or the claims poorly documented. To acquire legal title to it amid the confusion of existing private claims required inside knowledge. Wealthy purchasers soon found they could buy this information from the Public Land Office in Huntsville, Alabama. It says in 1818, a year after General John Coffee was appointed Surveyor General of Alabama, the Huntsville Republican informed its readers that the land office would give any information to people wishing to purchase an advantage in return for a liberal percentum of the price. When the client wished to locate a suitable tract or to engross several different parcels, if necessary, removing squatters, Coffey's employees, the newspaper alleged, were prepared to do business on commission and receive in pay either a part of the land purchased or money. So we've got corruption happening there as these wealthy plantation owners are moving their operations out west, searching better land. The other juxtaposition of all this was slavery, right? As states began to be created, that certain states were being free slaves or slave states and designated as such. Jumping into the middle of that last paragraph, it says many were shocked by the discovery that slavery was still legal in the United States. What they failed to appreciate was how far the concept of property had evolved in the new nation, where slaves were regarded as property, for actual property has been lawfully vested in that form. Jefferson bleakly wrote, Jefferson again being a slave owner, his very two sides of him. Jefferson bleakly wrote in 1824, and who can lawfully take it from the possessors? That concept overrode their humanity and the founding principle that all men were created equal with an inalienable right of liberty. The 1787 ordinances ban on slavery at the insistence of Rufus Putnam meant that the new states in the North had escaped that evil, and the Northerners' energetic egalitarian materialism, European visitors found the utterly foreign experience many of them were looking for. It was based on owning the land that Mansfield had measured out for the settlers. The possession of land is the aim of all action, generally speaking, and the cure for all social evils among men in the United States, wrote the visiting English writer Harriet Martineau in the Society in America in 1837. If a man disappointed in politics or love, he goes and buys land. If he disgraces himself, he betakes himself to a lot in the West. If the demand for any article of manufacture slackens, the operative drop into unsettled lands. If a citizen's neighbors rise above him in the towns, he betakes himself where he can be monarch of all he surveys. Very different than the lord-tenant relationship that had set up Europe and was still kind of in there, right? The outfall of that. One of the earliest accounts from John Mellish, I'm right in the middle of 177. One of the earliest accounts from John Mellish, a political radical who first traveled through the West in 1806, shows clearly that he saw land ownership as the key to American independence of spirit. Every industrious citizen of the United States has the power to become a freeholder on paying the small sum of $80, being the first installment on the purchase of a quarter of a section of land, he wrote in Travels in the United States. And though he should not have a shilling in the world, he can easily clear as much from the land as will pay for the remaining installments before they come due. So it gets kind of political and goes through some of the slavery stuff, some of the things that this American dream talks about. I didn't have a ton highlighted in these next couple pages. If there is something that popped out to you, let me know, but I'm going to jump quite a bit further ahead here. And I'm going to go down to the bottom of 173. It says here for says the social consequences of such independence were quite clear to her, as she wrote in Domestic Matters of the Americans. Any man's son may become the equal of another man's son, and the consciousness of this is certainly a spur to exertion. On the other hand, is also a spur to that coarse familiarity, untempered by any shadow of respect, which is assumed by the grossest and lowest of their intercourse with the highest and most refined. The American dream. You can become anything you want there. For good or for ill, a new kind of society was evolving from the way in which the public land was being measured out. It could be seen in Congress, where perceptible change in politics and attitudes occurred as representatives of the new Western states, like the future president William Henry Harrison, a delegate of Ohio territory, took their place. In his influential 1893 essay, The Significance of the Frontier in American History, Frederick Jackson Turner identified this change as the point when the United States took on individualistic, egalitarian qualities he associated with the frontier spirit. He says, the frontier promoted the formation of a composite nationally for the American people. In the crucible of the frontier, the immigrants were Americanized, liberated, and fused into a mixed race. As a result, the frontier people had a sense of themselves as Americans and an instinct for democracy that they had to teach the Atlantic states, which were still ridden with sectional self-interest. The rise of democracy as an effective force in the nation, Turner asserted, came with Western preponderance under Andrew Jackson and William Henry Harrison, and it met the triumph of the frontier. Just reading a couple last things here, just talking about what this land meant to the frontiersmen and to the American dream. It says, the bottom of that 174, ownership encouraged more than a sense of independence, divided up into squares, the land that reminded the earliest colonists of God and provoked a sensual hunger in later settlers, could also be treated by speculators simply as a commodity defined by numbers. A uniform, invariable shape that took no account of springs or hills or swamps was an obstacle to efficient agriculture, but to a financier tracking the rise and fall in land values, it was a great convenience. The grid, designed by Thomas Jefferson to create Republican farmers, also turned out to be ideal for buying, trading, and speculating. The consequence was what D.W. Menig, Doan of American geographers, termed the most basic feature of the settlement process, that it tended to be suffused in speculation. The paradox was that most of the speculators were not big-time financiers, though there were plenty of them, but small-time Republican farmers. Speculation, or as the 19th century called it, capitalism, and democracy went together. Bottom of that page there, the last sentence of the next paragraph says, nevertheless, by the end of the 19th century, more than 250 million acres of public domain had been converted into private property. Caught by the romance of the frontier, one can easily miss what underpinned its spirit of restlessness, individualism, and enterprise. The adventure of taming the wilderness was certainly there, but what drew people from eastern states and from around the world was a desire for this soil magically transformed from wilderness to property by the act of measurement and mapping. The fact that the grid could fractionally subdivide a continent into minute graph paper squares might appear to be simply a triumph of the mathematician's art, but the ease with which it made the land available to anyone who went west in search of it had an almost incalculable influence on the development of the American psyche and the American economy. I really like this idea, we've talked about when we were talking about Jefferson, the Republican farmer, the everyday man can come out here. Now we're really seeing that come through. European settlers with their last dime coming across the ocean to get their piece of the American dream. What was it? It was 500 million acres. 250 million acres of public domain had been converted into private property.
Yeah, that's a good stat. One of the other ones that caught my attention was the 1800 census counted that there were 5,300,000 people. And I'm sure that didn't count slaves, which were probably another 6 or 7 digit number. But to think about that, in 1800, there was as many people in the entire country as there is in like New York City right now. And if you give each of them their divvied up 250 million acres, that's a lot of land.
That really is.
And very few surveyors to do it. And
Yeah.
none regulated. I think
That was
what
a good chapter.
I was gonna say California, I think it was first 1899 or something, I think, for issuing the license surveyor.
That's what they were
License, yeah.
saying in the registrar's conference on the
Yeah.
first day. Yeah. I think he sums that chapter really well of what effect this made.
I'm always amazed the research that went into this
Yeah.
book.
So I started looking at the bibliography last night, and I was just amazed to, has this guy read all these books? Oh my God.
It's insane.
The
The other one,
go back to the 1700s even. How did he even get his hands on them?
yeah, we joked about this is our next book. It's about that Ohio, right? Blaze, Posts, and Stones.
Yeah.
I got that one the next day after we talked about that one.
That looked pretty thick.
It is pretty thick. It's no joke. It's no joke. Big book, 500 and something pages. 549. Yeah, might take us a couple of years. Yeah, going back to this one. When was this one? I forget when it was written, copyrighted, but
It wasn't
2002. Yeah,
that long ago. Yeah.
yeah, 2002. So less than 25 years.
And I did pick up at the conference. Oh, the oldest book that was at the auction there.
Oh, love it.
It's a delicate one. It's falling apart for sure. This one it's Robinson's New Surveying and Navigation. It's got all these signatures in it from really old, but 1878.
Nice.
Ezra someone from December 17th to 79 there. Yeah. Yeah. Kind of a fun one.
Someone need to make a documentary out of this. This is so fascinating.
Yeah. Okay.
What's it? Ken Burns, right?
Yes. Yes, that would be something.
Going back to the topo calls and sort of using that evidence when it comes to property surveying. We have an area down here in Southern California, kind of east of Simi Valley, called Box Canyon. And it's a mess, always has been a mess, mainly because there was a record of survey done many, many moons ago that instead of really carefully analyzing every single part and including the topo calls, he kind of did mathematically solved the boundary and went for it and started subdividing. And so now there's surveyors that have actually gone back and looked at the original GLO notes and looked at the topo calls and said, hey, like it sure seems like this guy was running kind of along a ridge and from ridge to ridge as you go across, whereas right now the line is established and what everyone has been trying to do is sort of on the other side or down below the ridge. So the question is if there's a way to fix it because it's a total cluster now and we think we know what to do, but the problem is getting, hundreds of owners to kind of quit claim if it's even possible. But yeah, just I think it's so important to follow in the footsteps as literal as we can when we're retracing these things, especially when we have good topo calls and comparing them to the map, like when they have their field notes out, and then you have the GLO map with the sections next to you, it should match, as you're going along the lines and you see the streams crossing and the hills and stuff. So yeah, crucial stuff.
It's interesting as I progressed in my career, and we've been doing this for 4 years now, and the things I've learned, I've definitely shifted in, I tend to go further back than I used to, just to double check things. And it may not be back to the original GLO notes on something. You get to a point where you kind of get a feel that everything's going. But as I've talked with younger surveyors, I've got an LSIT that's training for me. I'm teaching the lessons learned, but you do have to go further back than one back or one plus, right? Or just the deed. Because there's so many things that get missed. It's definitely one that keeps popping out to me, that more and more I find myself going back to, the original patent parcel and finding stuff that's changed, and had a couple of cases now that I'm arguing where, the parent track called across the road off of a town site corner, but then it was rewritten to come off of the section corner. And had I not gone back just a little bit more, in that case, I came up with the same solution. But now I have an argument to prove my solution that's much tighter, and so it's a good lesson learned there, is to really delve into the history of what we're dealing with.
I threw in the chat the Lincoln with the compass and chain is for sale on Books for $350, and then there's one which I know I didn't pay nearly close to that cost, and the other one there's one on eBay for $650 for that book.
So I clicked on that link, but I didn't see where it said in its description that it was first edition. But I just looked at it.
Yeah, may not. I just happened to click on things, and good point about first.
And Trent, maybe I lied. Maybe it was for sale, but it was those prices. Now I'm like, all right, maybe I'll wait.
Yeah, yeah, no kidding.
Yeah,
this is the book I have sitting on my conference table in the office. So yeah, it's insane.
Yeah, when does it get into the public domain that we can get one of the 651 signed by the author?
Okay.
If you click on that one.
Yeah, what is it? 50 years, 60 years? Or is it after the death of the author or something? I forget the rule.
Oh, that's cool. I thought, it's 100. I think it's 100 years to be able to go to copyright, to get rid of copyright. But
so we've pulled up, and I can't remember the link now. I've got it saved, but where we've pulled up some of these older books, and looked at just scanned copies that are outside the copyright, right?
Nice.
Crazy. Well, the next one's going to be fun. The next chapter, the shape of cities. So
yeah,
that'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's good. I really have thoroughly enjoyed this one. I a couple of guys grabbed me at the conference that have been on and apologized that they've been too busy to get there, and I gave them the full guilt trip. I'm missing out on a great book. So
yep. Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Okay, well, appreciate everybody for being here, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.
Sounds great.
Thanks.
Thank you,
everybody.